Welcome to the Story Learning Podcast, regular doses of language learning tips and motivation to help you become fluent in any language. With me, Olly Richards. For language programs, books, free resources, and much more, visit StoryLearning.com. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the I Will Teach You a Language podcast. Thank you very much for joining me. This is where we talk all about languages and language learning. So if you're learning a language and you'd like some tips and ideas for how to become a better studier, then you're in the right place. Now, without any further ado, we've got a perennial question today from Olly.
Hello, Mr. Richard. I am Ali from Saudi Arabia, and I have been learning French for a year and a half now. And what I want to ask you is this: how to make a clear distinction between masculine and feminine words in French? Thank you, and keep up the good work.
Hey, Ali, thank you very much for your question. Great to hear from you, and good job with your languages as well. A year and a half is a great amount of time to be learning French, so it's impressive that you're still motivated and you're still looking for ways to improve. It's what I like to see. So your question is, I believe, how do you remember the gender of nouns in French? And I'm going to answer this for all languages because really the answer is the same. And unfortunately, I would love to say that there's a trick and there's a simple way of remembering what gender each noun is, but unfortunately, noun genders are just one of those things that you have to learn on a case-by-case basis. So whenever you learn a new word, the first thing you've got to ask is, what's the gender? And actually factor that into your studying. So think, how can I remember the gender? Now, stepping back, at first, it seems like an impossible task. French has got 2 genders, German's got 3, so it's harder in German. But at first it seems like a really difficult task. The important thing is to keep going, okay? So you have to really always try to learn a word with the gender, but also just keep it up, because what happens eventually, when I speak languages now that have genders with their nouns, I just know instinctively what's what and which is which. It's something you learn, this instinctive knowledge, I guess. It's like native speakers. They don't learn. Well, I guess they might do when they're very young, but in general, they just know instinctively that la table is feminine. It's just the way it is. Okay. So as you go, you will make some mistakes. I still make mistakes with certain words and their genders in certain languages. But the thing is, it never really matters. As long as you've got the basic ones right, then that's the important thing. It is true that sometimes you hear people who are speaking a language like French and they make a lot of mistakes with basic words and their gender. So you might hear someone saying le maison instead of la maison, or le table instead of la table, and that sounds, it doesn't sound good. It's still not the end of the world. You can still communicate, but I think you do need to make sure that you really get the basic everyday vocabulary right. But I'm sure you've got that by now, Ali. You've been learning for a year and a half. I'm sure I'm sure you're good with your basic vocabulary, and so with the more difficult vocabulary, you will be forgiven. It's not the end of the world if you make a mistake. Now, having said that, it is important that you do try to remember the genders with the nouns. Something that I do is I use a lot of mnemonics, so like little images and verbal tricks and things like that when I'm remembering a word. And what I try to do in some way is to try to kind of bake in the gender to the image. So for example, if I was learning a beginner's French and I was learning la table, the table, I would try to imagine a feminine looking table rather than a masculine looking table. And I don't know what a feminine looking table is, but you can imagine like a girl's dressing table or something like that, as opposed to a kind of, a workstation in a garage. I don't know. I'm big gender stereotypes there. But the point is, whatever masculine or feminine means to you as it relates to that object, try and bake that into the image somehow. I do that and it helps me to actually remember later what the gender of the noun is. Okay, so we've said how you just have to remember the genders of nouns, and we've said how you have to keep going and eventually you will get this instinctive understanding. We've said how you'll make mistakes and it's okay, and we've also said how you can use imagery of some kind to make that object seem a bit more masculine or a bit more feminine. Now, having said all that, in practice, in most languages, you can actually guess the gender of many words using not rules, but generalizations. Okay, so I'll give you some examples here of kind of rules of thumb that you can use in French. So, for example, nouns that end in sme, isme, or asme, tend to be masculine. Le capitalisme tend to be is masculine, for example. So most nouns that end with sme are masculine. Similarly, words that end in et, like un ticket, un garçonnet, are masculine. On the other hand, there are certain words that tend to be feminine. So tie, for example, une amitié, la pitié are feminine. Words that end in ee, like la soirée, une fée, la journée, tend to be feminine, right? So once you start to notice those patterns, that allows you to have an educated guess. Okay, so it can be really helpful to look at those patterns and think to yourself, okay, this word, all these words that end in these certain combinations of letters tend to be masculine or feminine. It's not always the case, but if you can learn to recognize those patterns, then that will help you a lot. It was also quite funny. It gets harder when you learn multiple languages somehow, because certain words are actually different between different languages. So, for example, if you take the word planet, in French, planet is feminine. You get la planète. But in Spanish, it's masculine, el planeta, which is quite interesting. So when you learn multiple languages, it kind of gives you this extra layer of difficulty when you have to remember the genders from one language to the next. But again, these things almost never matter. Like, it's one of those things that when you're talking about less common words, it's much more important to, so yes, you focus on learning the gender, but really other things are more important. The bigger picture is much more important. Okay? So I hope that's helpful for you, Olly. Really, the answer is lots of hard work and don't look for shortcuts. That's really the way to go with that. Some things in language learning, you just have to put your head down and remember it. If you'd like to ask me a question like Olly did, you can go to iwillteachyoualanguage.com/ask. Now, at the end of every episode, I like to leave you with a resource of some kind on the topic of the show. And I came across a great website which I used to give you the examples in French that I just gave you. Because my French is a bit rusty, so I can't really remember all these rules. But I found this cool site called French Your Way, and one blog post in particular that's called Masculine or Feminine, Telling the Gender of French Nouns. So that's one for you definitely to check out. I'll put a link to that in the show notes, along with all of the notes from today, and of course the transcript, so you can read along to everything I've said in case I said some weird stuff that you didn't understand and you'd like to practice your English at the same time. You can find that at iwillteachyoualanguage.com/episode 194. And if you've got any tricks for remembering the gender of nouns in French or any other language, come along and leave us a comment over there as well. That's it for today. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. And here at Story Learning, everything that I do is powered by stories, whether that's writing books, teaching lessons, crafting courses. My mission is to help everyone succeed at learning a new language through the power of story. And we now have comprehensive language courses in over 15 languages, from Spanish to French, Korean to Japanese, and across all levels from beginner to mastery. And you can take a 7-day free trial of any of these programs by visiting storylearning.com/courses. I've poured my heart and soul into creating these courses over the last 10 or so years, and we've helped tens of thousands of new students achieve their dreams of learning a new language, all through the power of story. So go ahead and take a free trial. There's no commitment. You can try out our method for free. See if this can also be the breakthrough for you that it's been for so many other people. storylearning.com/courses.